Hi there, this is Power and Politics. I'm JP Tasker in Ottawa. Prime Minister Mark Carney is in Europe looking to strengthen Canada's strategic relationship with key allies.
Canada and Poland come together. Poland is absolutely essential to the defense of Ukraine.
What do Canada and Poland see as the possible reality of post-war peace in Ukraine? We'll talk to Poland's ambassador to Canada just ahead. Plus,
we're taking in trillions of dollars in tariffs, and we're stopping wars because of tariffs.
President Donald Trump continues to flaunt his trade strategy just days after Canada committed to dropping some retaliatory tariffs. Will leveling the playing field give Canada a leg up in negotiations? We'll ask former Conservative Cabinet Minister James Moore. Meanwhile, with 3 weeks until MPs return to Parliament, one new poll shows a slight shift in the Conservatives' favour. The Power Panel joins me to talk about what could be behind those numbers and if they can stick. Power and Politics starts right now. Prime Minister Mark Carney was in Poland today, sitting down with Prime Minister Donald Tusk to plan out post-war peace in Ukraine. Both Prime Ministers agreed to work closer together.
So we're together working side by side in Ukraine, together side by side in NATO. And if I may say, we learned much from the Prime Minister, from his government, including the importance of pulling our full weight in NATO.
The meeting comes one day after Carney joined President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv to celebrate Ukrainian Independence Day.
Your fight is our fight. That your struggle is our cause. And that your independence will be our victory.
This was Carney's first official trip to Ukraine, where he committed to possibly sending Canadian troops in the event of a ceasefire. But with recent attempts by the U.S. to broker a settlement, what are the prospects of getting there? Witold Dzielski is the ambassador of the Republic of Poland to Canada, and he joins me now in studio. Nice to see you, Ambassador. Thanks for coming in.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So, do you think President Trump will be able to broker a peace deal with Ukraine? Do you trust his peacemaking abilities?
Well, I very much hope so, and it is in the interest of Poland, of Canada, and of the allied countries for him to be successful. In the end, he represents the democratic nations in the struggle against a very strong, brutal, authoritarian regime and authoritarian actor, Mr. Putin.
Under his plan, though, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is supposed to sit down and have some sort of bilateral meeting with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. And to this point, it hasn't happened. It hasn't materialized. And the Russians are seemingly pushing back to this idea of the two leaders sitting down and hashing it out. Does it seem to you like the peace process is a little shaky at the moment, given that there's no movement on that meeting?
Poland, similarly to the countries of the region, know Russian tactics quite well. We've been preaching to our allies for many years what is going to happen. Many of them did not believe us, and things have happened. And then people said we should have listened to the polls. So we support President Trump. We provide our counsel, both to him directly, and President Nawrocki will be, Karol Nawrocki, President of Poland, will be in Washington for a bilateral visit with the beginning of September. But also working with our European allies, in those conversations, Prime Minister Donald Tusk is heavily engaged, and the Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, and many other actors. So we provide our counsel, and our counsel is based in reality and history of our global relations with Russia, I would say. So that's the way I would answer your question.
Yeah, because Sergei Lavrov, who's Russia's foreign affairs minister, as you well know, was on Meet the Press American television over the weekend, and he, some people question his motives, obviously, but he was saying that there's too many issues that are unresolved. We can't possibly get together and talk things out, Russia and Ukraine. they don't seem all that enthused about this peace program that Trump is promoting.
Well, Russians have a feeling of being momentarily the winning side. So it might not be in their interest to play along the proposals presented by Washington right now. But in their trickery, they at some point may just go too far, and it's happening. It's with the beginning of the full-scale, illegal, brutal war against Ukraine. It was Poland, the Baltics, UK, Canada, United States that had a sense what is going on, and we had to explain to many of our other partners what are the Putin's intentions. It did work. Now, nearly entire Europe is convinced that this is that Putin needs to be stopped, and we have to stand against him. So we had the change of power in Washington. And President Trump has already changed his language, and he understands that things are a little bit more complicated. So he is already strong in the communication, and that language may get even strengthened, and that will be a serious problem for Putin.
Let's talk about what our prime ministers discussed today. The Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and Mark Carney were at a press conference together earlier today, and they were asked about security guarantees in particular. And what we heard from Mr. Tusk is that the Poles are ruling out putting troops on the ground in Ukraine if it comes to that, if there is some sort of peace agreement in this post-war period. Our Prime Minister Mark Carney says there's a possibility Canadian soldiers could be there to help keep the peace if they're able to broker one with Russia. Why is Warsaw ruling out the possibility of putting soldiers in Ukraine at this point?
We have a different strategic position and different strategic job in this regard. Poland is the #1 and has been for a number of years base for the Allied support to Ukraine. We are, a strong, resilient country being constantly attacked in a kinetic manner with espionage tactics by the Russians, through the border. We have to. Poland needs to again remain a solid base that will be able to provide logistical support, organizational support, etc., for our allies to go in and provide possible support. And this is our role that we will continue.
Both of them talked about, too, an immediate, complete, and unconditional ceasefire. There was a joint statement that your government and ours released. Russia's ruled out a ceasefire. Trump has been wishy-washy on a ceasefire, right? He's going into some of these meetings, he seemed to be open to it, but then after sitting down with Putin in Alaska, he said, I don't know if we really need a ceasefire. Maybe we'll just get a full peace deal. Why is Mr. Tusk and Prime Minister Carney, why are they still hung up on getting a ceasefire? Why is that such an important step, do you think?
Because Poland and Canada are like-minded on very many topics, but also in this regard. We from the very beginning of the full-scale aggression, we have nearly exactly the same position. We want to preserve lives. We don't want the conflict to develop, and we stand for human rights, obviously, but for sovereignty, for legal standards, for international law. And this is from our country's perspective, this is the only logical, responsible way to act.
And speaking of our relationship, there was this push today, too, to make us closer allies, or at least start the process of bringing us closer together, both kind of signing off on this idea of elevating the bilateral relationship to a strategic partnership. What does that mean in practice? How do you envision that playing out?
This is a process that is strengthened by the statement and the declaration and the meetings in Warsaw today, but this is the process that has been going on for a couple of years now, especially since the beginning of the full-scale war. But it brings to the perspective a number of military defense, security topics, but also economy-related as well. Poland in the last 3 decades has been an European tiger, so to speak. We are, as your wonderful ambassador, Catherine Godin in Warsaw said today after the meetings, that Poland is number one in terms of growth, number one country in Europe. I like this statement, but we are also, number one actor in NATO in terms of spending for defense. We are a country that has become very modern in terms of technology, and in that regard, we have become a very attractive partner for many countries around the world. We like working with Canadians, because we are like-minded. We, in so many ways, we think in a similar way. We are aligned politically, and we are responsible business actors. So there's already a lot of business that is happening, as has been happening in recent years, which are quite sort of new in the game, but we are looking for number of avenues that we can develop that, and it is happening also because of the trade war between Canada and the United States. The contracts which are being signed in recent months between Poland and Canada are, I would say, spectacular. Yeah,
on the economy, you might remember our former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau kind of famously said there was no business case to sell Canadian LNG to Europe. Well, when you look at what the Americans are doing, they sent 44 million tons of LNG to Europe last year. They're obviously seeing a business case for what they're producing. Is Poland interested in Canada's natural resources and LNG in particular? Is that something that you would like to see advance as these two countries get closer together?
Yeah. Well, remember, some of that LNG that is coming from United States to Europe, to Poland, is also Canadian LNG, but it's being sold for a much higher price, I would say, than when it would come from Canada. Yes, we are constantly interested. We would like the Canadian LNG market to open to Europe. We would like to see the Canadian gas flowing to the east coast on Canada, and the Canadian gas flowing in European pipelines. This is, one of the energy topics that we are working on with Canadians for a number of years. There are others which are also very significant, and we are much more successful in the other areas than gas so far. But if you're able to make a push in that regard, that will be to the benefit of Europe, and that will be to the benefit of Canada.
All right, Ambassador Dzielski, nice to see you. Thank you for coming in, sir.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
After attempting to crack down on crime in the U.S. Capitol, President Donald Trump is now eyeing another big city.
We will solve Chicago within 1 week, maybe less, but within 1 week we will have no crime in Chicago, just like we have no crime in D.C.
The latest on Trump's plans to deploy National Guard troops to more U.S. cities. Next. Stay with us. Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that Canada is removing many of its retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, arguing they aren't the right tool for this current moment.
What we're doing, again, is matching what the U.S. is doing. That's fair. It's fair to match what they've done. And it puts us in a better position to focus in on exactly those sectors, work for it. So sometimes, to go back to the earlier question, yeah, you drop the gloves in the first period. When you're late in the game, dropping the gloves and taking the extra penalty might not be the best thing to do.
As trade tensions continue with the U.S., what could this mean for negotiations between the two countries? James Moore is a former Conservative industry minister, and he joins me now. Hey, James, thanks for coming on.
Pleasure's mine.
How would you characterize what the Prime Minister has done here with the retaliatory tariffs? Is it a form of capitulation, a betrayal, or do you see it as, an act of goodwill to try and get a deal done?
I think it's appropriate for the moment, but there's a piece of his analogy that is unknown. He says that there are times in a hockey game where you do want to go into the corners, elbows up, and maybe drop the gloves, and there's times to be more disciplined and finesse things. But at the end of the analogy that you just played right there, as he said, when you're heading towards the end of a game and it's very close, maybe you don't want to take a penalty. So the question is, are we towards the end of the game? How close are we towards the end of the game? That's the question that we don't know. And the media availability that you're clipping right now next to me here, the Prime Minister said that one of the things that President Trump said is that they are negotiations, and that the tariff consideration and the trade issue of Kuzma and the renegotiation that was expected for calendar 26 will be either moved forward or sort of sistered with the tariff conversation. Well, that's new news, and I think Canadians and industries that are in workers who are impacted by the tariff question will be, wanting to see more information about what exactly that timeline looks like, what's on the table, and how it is that we're going to approach this, and also the question of where's Mexico in this. So there are a lot of questions still in front of us.
Yeah, Prime Minister Carney is sort of pitching this as Trump personally assured him that dropping these retaliatory tariffs would kickstart the negotiations. Again, things were stalled. This is a way to clear the logjam. Are you buying what he's selling with that rhetoric?
I don't know. I mean, I think, as I said, it's the appropriate policy. The Prime Minister is correct that Canada did do retaliatory tariffs. Now, he did become, he won the Liberal leadership, became the Prime Minister, then was a later elected Prime Minister. And in that sort of window of blur of 45 to 60 days, rhetoric was pretty hot about elbows up and standing in solidarity. Premier Ford was saying what he was saying. All Canadians were saying what they were saying. And there was a bit of a catharsis there, a bit of a venting about energy. And it wasn't just about tariffs. It was about the President of the United States saying that Canada is not a real country. Donald Trump saying that we could be a 51st state. We'd be lucky to be a 51st state. So the pushback and the anger that existed and still exists for a lot of Canadians, it wasn't just tariff-based. It was about the belligerence and the aggression that came from the White House and the way in which the President of the United States seemed to dismiss a longtime trading partner and an ally. So, we were elbows up in the beginning, and the Prime Minister saying dollar for dollar tariffs and all that. But at a certain point, the arithmetic of that runs out. Less than 1% of Canada's daily less than 1% of the American daily GDP output is dependent on trade access into Canada. About 1/5 of Canada's daily GDP output is dependent on access to the United States. So the sustainability of us in a full-blown permanent trade war with the United States, it would hurt America, it would hurt Canadians as well. And then you layer on top of it the go-forward dynamic of you're going to have reciprocal tariffs on American goods coming into Canada. Well, now you're punishing Canadian consumers and you're annoying the American president. So I think we made our point. There's a place for countervailing and reciprocal tariffs in certain industries that are being treated grossly unfairly by the administration: steel, aluminum, certain food products, and those are going to be continued going forward. But the idea of getting more and more every day towards a tariff-free, mutually accessible, free market access in both economies is really an important place. So if we're marching down that path, that's a good thing for Canada.
There are some groups, some organizations that want to maintain these retaliatory tariffs. They do want dollar for dollar. We heard from Unifor, which represents a lot of the workers that are in these affected industries. They're not happy with Carney's move. They want to keep those countermeasures in place. We also heard from the steel sector. They're disappointed as well. What's your message to those groups that are calling for more tariffs and to keep what we had in place for longer and perhaps even go further?
I imagine the Prime Minister is open to adjusting his policy going forward, because it has wavered and adjusted in the past going forward. And also, we have to be mindful that the President of the United States, as we saw in the past with 232 tariffs and the current 232 tariffs, and invoking national security as a reason to say that British Columbia lumber may not be allowed into the United States. We are in a position here where it's fool me once, shame on you; fool me twice, shame on me. So the flexibility of the Prime Minister to have an approach to tariffs is responsible. But I also think in some ways it's kind of healthy that the Prime Minister is getting criticized by not just political opponents, but also being criticized by unions and industry groups and consumer groups and others. I think there's a healthy dialogue in the country, because it actually shows, I think, to the Americans that the Prime Minister of the country is trying to get something done here in a way that is going to be beneficial, not just for Canada, not just for the United States, but for the whole of the North American platform that needs to be solid so that we can stay competitive with the rising threat of China in the global space. By the way, I just want to add, I think the most important thing among the most important things, but maybe that came out of last week, was the press conference that President Trump had after speaking to Prime Minister Carney. He didn't call him Governor Carney. He didn't, he said that he liked Mark Carney. He said that he liked working with the Prime Minister. That's a good thing. Prime Minister Carney is going to have a lot of criticism, and that's fine. A lot of political criticism, that's fine. I don't know the politics of this and what it's going to look like in the fullness of time. I don't know. But the fact that we've gone from the President of the United States chastising, laughing at, calling names of the Prime Minister of Canada, to saying that not only is he going to drop that, but he likes Mark Carney and likes working with him. I'm hopeful, but I'm not going to bet my house on it, but I'm hopeful that that will lead to a more constructive dialogue between the President and the Prime Minister.
Definitely more complimentary of Carney than he was of Trudeau. There's no doubt about it. And just as we're speaking now, there's something moving on the wires, James. Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc has just arrived in Washington. There's going to be some more talks between him and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick over the next couple of days. They haven't spoken in person in quite some time. Do you read that as a sign that the retaliatory tariffs being dropped, that was welcomed by Washington, and now, hey, come on down, let's talk? Is that a positive development?
I like to think of myself as an optimistic person, but I will retreat to my line: fool me once, shame on you; fool me twice, shame on me. So I'm hopeful. Look, Minister LeBlanc is an experienced politician. He's obviously built good inroads with certain members of the administration. The question is whether or not Mr. Secretary Lutnick has, predominant influence over the president. We don't know. But I think conversation is good. Dialogue is good. Maybe the Minister LeBlanc will tell Secretary Lutnick about what's happening in Canada and the shift that's happening and the efforts to cool things down. And I really do think that narrative about not just what's good for America, what's good for Canada, but what's good for the North American economic union that has led to more peace and prosperity and integration economically, that has led to the highest quality of life of any cohort of human beings in human history as a result of NAFTA and now CUSMA and that relationship. And trying to blow that apart by going after a particular auto mandate, for example, and trying to repatriate that down to Michigan or Kentucky or South Carolina. There's a bigger picture and a bigger dynamic at play here. And I think that we as Canadians can never tire, and also our American and Mexican allies can never tire of telling the story about the success of North America when we are united economically and facing the rest of the world and trading with the rest of the world as a unit. I think it's only positive for all of us.
All right, let's leave it there. James Moore, former Conservative Industry Minister, thanks for coming on, sir. Nice to see you.
Pleasure was mine.
Turning now to Washington, where U.S. President Donald Trump is vowing to expand his crime crackdown to more U.S. cities. This comes just 2 weeks after he deployed National Guard troops to the streets of the U.S. Capitol. The CBC's Cameron McIntosh has the latest from Washington. Cam, what did Trump say today about expanding his effort to curb crime?
Yeah, well, a couple of developments here today. The president signed, it was 4 executive orders, all of them related to crime. Crime, of course, being one of the areas that he sees a lot of strength in, right? He likes to be the tough on crime president. The National Guard troops that have been now in D.C. for almost 2 weeks, they're going to start to be armed as of today. There are some walking around on the National Mall here. They are carrying sidearms. That's new. That's a new development in all this. Also, one of those executive orders today called for the creation of a full-time unit within the D.C. National Guard to ensure the safety of the city of Washington. So from that, it looks as though the president is taking steps to make this a state of a permanent state of affairs here. Also today, too, the president started again talking about perhaps doing this in other cities that he's mentioned in the past: New York, Baltimore, Los Angeles. But today, one city that he was really speaking about specifically is Chicago. Take a listen to President Trump.
Chicago is a disaster, and the governor of Illinois should say, President, would you do us the honor of cleaning up our city? We need help. We may wait. We may or may not. We may just go in and do it, which is probably what we should do. The problem is, it's not nice when you go in and do it and somebody else is standing there saying, as we give great results, say, we don't want the military.
Now, of course, everyone here is on either side of this issue, is arguing over stats. The president is saying today that Chicago is like a killing field with a high crime rate. In terms of D.C. and basically the pretense that was used to do this in D.C., President Trump called D.C. one of the most violent cities in the world. Today, Congress launching an investigation also into the crime statistics being used by the city of by the city of Washington, particularly by the mayor's office here. Of course, Congress has oversight over the administration of Washington. So basically, there's been a lot of debate about just how violent D.C. actually is, what the true crime numbers are. Donald Trump is working off of one set of numbers, the city working off another set, and of course we're starting to see this play out now in Chicago.
Speaking of Chicago, how's it going over there?
Well, from the leadership of Chicago, so at the state level and at the mayoral level, not very well at all. In fact, both the governor and the mayor of Chicago held a press conference earlier today, really deriding this, going after President Trump and insisting that bringing the National Guard into Chicago would be unconstitutional. Let's hear from both men right now.
The brave men and women who signed up to serve our country did not sign up to occupy American cities. This is costly, illegal, and unconstitutional. I'm going to use every single tool that is at my disposal in order to keep the people of the city safe. What this president is attempting to do is not just unconstitutional, but it is very much a threat to our democracy.
There is no emergency in Chicago that calls for armed military intervention. There is no insurrection. There is no insurrection. Like every major American city in both blue and red states, we deal with crime in Chicago.
Now, a big difference between Chicago and D.C. There's no state government here overseeing the District of Columbia. As I mentioned before, it's overseen by Congress. What happened here is basically the president used something called the Home Rule Act, which allows the president to have some powers over the city here temporarily in times of crisis. This is what the Trump administration has used to take over policing here. It's only good for 30 days. After that, he would have to go to Congress to pass this into law. That's likely coming here. Illinois, though, is a state. And the president does not have the same kinds of powers over Chicago that he would over the District of Columbia or the city of Washington here. So really interesting to see how this is going to play out. You heard both the mayor and the governor there talk about the legality of this, the constitutionality of it, and the whole notion that if the president decides to try to activate the National Guard in Illinois to patrol the streets of Chicago, that they'll very likely be taking the Trump administration to court.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much, CBC's Cameron McIntosh in Washington for us tonight. Nice to see you.
Good seeing you.
Israel has struck another hospital in Gaza. At least 20 people were killed in the strikes on Nasser Hospital in southern Gaza, according to Gaza's health ministry. 5 journalists, including a contractor for Reuters and one for Al Jazeera, were among the dead. Several countries have come out to condemn the attack. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the deaths a tragic mishap that Israel deeply regrets. The military says the incident is being investigated.
The IDF does not intentionally target civilians. The IDF makes every effort to mitigate harm to civilians while ensuring the safety of our troops. Any incident that raises concern in this regard is addressed by the relevant mechanisms in the IDF.
This as the desperation in Gaza grows. A UN-backed report has found that famine is occurring in parts of Gaza and is likely spreading. Canada has responded to that report, saying Israel is not doing enough to stop the starvation in Gaza. Randeep Sarai is the Secretary of State for International Development, and he joins me now. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Well, JP, thank you for having me, and it's always a pleasure to be on your show.
I want to start with the Israeli airstrike on a Gaza hospital today. At least 19 people are dead, including 5 journalists. The IDF has confirmed that the strikes took place, but they say they did not intentionally target those civilians. It said Hamas caused the conditions that led to those deaths. What's your reaction to that, sir?
Look, it's a catastrophe. I think it's a really sad day. This is happening daily. From what I read every morning, civilians are being killed, whether seeking aid or going to the hospital. In this case, it was a very what reports have shown, first hit, and then those going to rescue those that were hit by the hit were hit with a subsequent missile attack. So I think it's really sad. Journalists, healthcare workers, and those seeking aid seeking healthcare should not be ever persecuted. I think the government needs to do much better. The Israeli government in this regards. There's no reason for hospitals to be attacked in such a way, and it's reason why international agencies, governments, and the UN has been calling for more humanitarian relief, more protection of places like hospitals, and this is something that needs to be remedied immediately.
You've endorsed this new UN-backed report that says there are famine conditions in Gaza, and today you released a strongly worded statement blaming the Israeli government. You said Israel is, quote, an occupying power and it is failing to meet its obligations under international law. Why are you speaking out now?
Look, I've been speaking out since the day I've got this portfolio, and even before that as a member of parliament. I think what's happening there is completely preventable. I think humanitarian agencies need to be granted access immediately so that they can get aid in. The IPC is a very credible organization established in 2011. They've only declared 4 classified 5 famines, and this is the only one that's a completely preventable one. The world needs to act. We've been doing as much as we can, whether it's sanctions, whether it's statements, whether it's pressure, whether it's giving aid, having aid ready on the ground, providing any type of aid that is allowed in, including some ones that are a little controversial, like airdrops. But we're doing whatever we can to get aid into the Gaza territory as people are starving every day. Hundreds of thousands of children are about to die of famine, of starvation. There's wasting happening. There's stunted growth happening. It's a humanitarian catastrophe, and it's a very sad day. And my statements are just echoing what everyone feels about Canadians are feeling as a whole.
Israel says the authors of that UN report on the famine in Gaza have been manipulated by Hamas. Israel maintains it has been providing sufficient food. It has done some airdrops, as you say, into the territory. It's allowed thousands of aid trucks into the territory, and it has helped facilitate some community kitchens to feed residents. That's what the Israeli government is saying. What do you say to their defense?
Well, look, there hasn't been. When they say thousands of trucks have come in, they need 500 to 600 a day just to survive. That is the bare essential need. And there's, at the moment, barely 100 or hundreds in plural going in. And they're also going in a manner that is causing severe civilian deaths where they're being brought to certain focal points only, and then hundreds and hundreds of civilians have been shot and killed. I think one of the largest amount of humanitarian workers that have lost their lives has been in this region in the last 22 months. No, the aid is not getting to where it's needed. It's not getting in the amount that it's to be brought in. And the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, that's trying to do it is doing it in an incorrect way, and that's not just from Canada or the UK or France saying. That's every single humanitarian organization in the world that does this. Their expertise has said this is the wrong way, and this is not the right way to do it, and it must be stopped. And a fair and equitable way is the only way that humanitarian aid has to be brought in, and that's been our goal, and that's been our focus, is to allow safe, reliable aid to be brought in impartially to feed those that are most vulnerable and most in need.
Yeah, Israel says it's gone to, quote, unprecedented lengths to enable aid to go into enemy territory. So you're telling me that's not what you're seeing from your vantage point?
Absolutely not. I've done a very conscientious decision to meet all humanitarian organizations, whether they're based in Canada, or whether they're multilateral or global or united at the UN. I've met with all of them, and quite frankly, unless they're great manipulators, they've all had the exact same statements of exactly what is happening on the ground, what's happening to their humanitarian aid workers, and how it is being prevented, and how the current aid that is being sent in, how wrong it is and how dangerous it is. So I think they're very, they're all on one page. They've all been very clear, and I think we, in the last decades and hundreds of years, have really respected these humanitarian organizations for the work they do. They've done it in very dangerous territories before, and we must support them and respect them, and we do. And unfortunately, the Israeli government has not respected their neutrality or their humanitarian aid work, and has blocked it and set up their own organization instead.
You mentioned the IPC, this organization that works with the UN on food issues, and in their report they detail that they estimate about 500,000 Gazans are experiencing famine right now, a quarter of the population, just a staggering figure. You said today with me now and in your statement earlier that you're going to do whatever you can to, quote, alleviate the suffering. You're going to try to get aid in there to help. What exactly do you have planned to try and help the folks out who are in famine conditions?
Look, we've Minister Anand just was in the region. She's announced another 30 million in humanitarian aid for it. We've worked with our Jordanian counterparts to help facilitate. They've attempted to negotiate a slight ease to have airdrops brought in. We're one of those aspects. One of the openings in the corridor was being negotiated. I'm still optimistic and hopeful that the Israeli government in their negotiations will allow that access, unimpeded access for that aid to go in. So I think it's everything's on the table. We're doing every and all means to get aid in, talking to the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Israelis themselves, our American counterparts, British, French, and others to put the pressure on to allow that aid to go in, and we'll continue to keep working and plugging away. That's my job, and that's my role, is to make sure that Canadian humanitarian assistance gets to those that are most vulnerable and most needy. And in this case, it's Gazans that are facing an unprecedented, preventable famine.
All right, let's leave it there. Randeep Sarai, Secretary of State for International Development. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Pleasure. Thank you.
A new poll suggests Conservatives are slightly ahead of the Liberals in support for the first time in months. Up next, a power panel on what may be driving the shift. Stay with us. Some new polling is pointing to a possible shift among Canadian voters. According to Abacus data, the Conservative Party has pulled ahead of the Liberals when it comes to national voter intention. This hasn't happened since March. It appears to be due to a change in priorities. Affordability now tops President Donald Trump as the issues voters care about most. That said, most Canadians have a positive view of Prime Minister Carney versus a negative view of Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. It's time to bring in the Power Panel. Vandana Cutter was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister, and Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. Hey guys, nice to see you all.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Vandana, are you panicking?
No, not. I'm definitely not panicking. I think, affordability has been top of Canadians' minds for a long time, even when I still worked in the Prime Minister's office. I think, there was obviously with the news of Donald Trump, people were lasered focused onto getting a deal. And while I do think Carney has been talking about affordability measures, that he'll be talking about, the middle class tax cut July 1st, taking out the consumer carbon tax so that gas prices would be cheaper. He's been talking, and even on the macro sense, the supports he's given for softwood lumber, for steel, for Canadians, has all been part of still trying to think about affordability and what affects Canadians' lives. But yes, with back to school coming forward, there's the fall, there's Halloween, even Christmas, I dare say it, is coming. Caregivers, parents, families, it's a time they're back to reality after the summertime, and they're thinking about these expenses. So I think it's normal. So while I think that Mr. Carney and people have faith in him, and he's been doing a good job, talking about affordability is something that Canadians want to hear more about.
Yeah, Lisa, this does seem to be a bit of a one-off. We'll put it like that. I mean, Nanos Research has the Liberals up 12 points over the Conservatives. Liaison Strategies, the Liberals are up 9 in their polling. Leger, one of the most trusted pollsters, they have the Liberals up 10 points over the Conservatives. What do you make of what Abacus is reporting here? David Coletto, the pollster, has the Conservatives up by 2. It's not what other pollsters are tracking. But do you think that this is maybe the canary in the coal mine, to use a Cape Breton reference for you there, or is it something to just ignore?
Never ignore. I think David Coletto does really good work, like all the other pollsters that you mentioned as well. But I do think that you have to remember what we always say, the poll that really matters is the one that happens on Election Day. So even if Conservatives do see an uptick, they really have to put their head down and get to work. And the work that they have to do is to show that they're working with the government, not against, but they're holding the government to account and making sure that they're delivering on the promises that they made to Canadians during the election campaign. The Prime Minister has a pretty tough hill to climb. He has to try to make changes quickly that are going to reverse some of the policies that put Canadians in a negative place after 10 years of a Justin Trudeau government. So that may not happen quickly enough for him to be able to say, look, I've done much better for you. And that grace that Vandana mentioned, that people still like Mark Carney, has a best before date. It's going to end up degrading as time goes by. And the opposition is going to try to make sure that they bring it to the attention of the people of Canada as much as they can in terms of, are you really doing better? Are things better off? And they'll want people to judge Mr. Carney on what's happening now, not on what's going to be happening in 2, 5, 10 years from now.
Brad, what do you make of this shift that Abacus is reporting? I mean, when you dig into the details, there's some interesting figures when it comes to favorable versus unfavorable impressions. Mark Carney's still up 18 points versus Poilievre's -2. So there's obviously a big divide in terms of how people like these guys. But when it comes to the party vote, apparently the Conservatives are, a little bit ahead of the Liberals.
So if you're going to take a look at a horse race number in the middle of August, or towards the end of August, obviously, this last one, on a horse race, we just had an election where we're a long way away from the next election. What I think is valuable from research that's done in between elections isn't the horse race per se, because as to Lisa's point, we're not about to go to the polls. So these are not as meaningful. The question is what trends are we seeing in the research throughout the summer and since the last federal election campaign. And there are some trends. And the first one is it's not just the horse race, because this is the margin of error in the Abacus poll is 2.2, and the difference between the two parties is about 2 points. So I don't think that we should break out the champagne for my Conservative friends or break out the Kleenex for my Liberal friends. I don't think that those horse race numbers are at all meaningful at this stage. the trend lines that we do see is affordability is an issue. It's not just in this poll. It's been a consistent pattern. As Trump enters our news space in Canada with threats of our sovereignty or our jobs and our economy, then the issue of Trump goes up. The other things, you mentioned favorability numbers. Carney is still well ahead. Best prime minister, dealing with Trump, best at. So these issues are kind of based on what is in our news and what is top of mind. When Trump disappears from our front pages, then the issues that are underlying for Canadians, that is affordability, housing, and the economy, come to the fore. And therefore, Poilievre's also been out of the headlines for the last number of months. That's probably a good thing. But his favorabilities are not moving. There seems to be a softening when it comes to whether or not Canada's on the right track or on the wrong track. And that would be something that I would say to the Carney advisors that they're probably paying the most attention to here. But we won't know until we see more research, more opinion polls showing that the trends in this Abacus poll are borne out in other polls as well.
And the NDP are still on the map, Brad. 7% Abacus has the map nationwide.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And I want to go back to those other polls that showed the NDP at 12% and at 10%.
You like those other ones better.
The Don Davies effect is in full effect, but well, we missed a few New Democrats in this poll.
All right, Vandana, let's talk about one thing that's just breaking as we're on the air. Dominic LeBlanc, the Canada-U.S. Trade Minister, has just arrived in Washington, we're told, and he's going to be meeting with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick over the next couple of days. Do you think that's coming about as a result of Carney's decision to drop the retaliatory tariffs last Friday? Do you think that there's a bit of an opening here potentially for a deal with this movement today?
I think so. I think all dialogue is good dialogue. And I know that from Mr. LeBlanc's perspective, that him and Secretary Lutnick have a positive relationship, and they're able to work together and have fulsome conversations. This sounds like that the pulling back from some of the retaliatory tariffs has been helpful to open up this place to get Mr. LeBlanc to come to Washington. So I think there's only a positive move. I'm not sure this means make a deal today or tomorrow, but definitely is positive. And every conversation is going to be important, whether that leads to a deal immediately or soon, or any pieces of the deal that need to come together, things that bother them that we need to work on, or vice versa. I think that's important. I think it's good to have Dom LeBlanc there. He is, well versed in building relationships and in negotiation. So, I think this will be a positive step.
Lisa, it was all quiet sort of on the Western Front for several weeks, and then we get this announcement Friday, the retaliatory tariffs. Most of them are gone. Obviously, the ones for steel and aluminum and autos are still in place. And now, Monday, he shows up in Washington, Dominic LeBlanc meeting with Lutnick. Do you think that there is some sort of connection there?
Of course there is. And Minister LeBlanc literally said that. He said it in a very understated way. He said, well, I think it'll be easier now to negotiate. There's no question in my mind that the Americans said, unless you start dropping these things, we're not going to even come back to the table, because that's how they played with Canada the last 6 months. It's been hardball ever since the beginning of Donald Trump's administration. But I'd like to know what it is that Minister LeBlanc is negotiating, because you asked the right question, will there be a deal? But what's the deal that we're looking for? I don't think it's CUSMA. I think CUSMA is going to be in a process. The government's going to go back and they're going to have their consultations with Canadians about what should be in CUSMA. So that's a signal to me that it's not CUSMA. I think what they're really trying to get their arms around are these big tariffs in steel, aluminum, and autos, the ones that are really draining not only the Canadian public purse, but as well really impacting on whether or not people want to invest in this country. So I hope that's what he's there for, and I'd like to see announcements coming from that.
Lisa, what's your stance on this decision to pull back on the tariffs? Do you think that it was a capitulation? Do you think it was the right move? We heard from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre saying that he'd like to see some sort of unspecified countermeasures. He doesn't necessarily want to give up on tariffs. What's your vantage point?
Yeah, I think it was the only move. That was the only move. I don't even know if I believed in all the tariffs that we put on at the beginning, just because I recognized from the beginning the incredible difference of power between Canada and the United States and who tariffs hurt at the end of the day. And it became clearer over the summer that the tariffs were having, it does. does have an impact, though, JP. They do not like the fact that the American liquor is not on the store shelves in BC and Ontario. That's a big one. So watch this space for that one to be next.
Brad, there's been some progressive blowback over the last couple of days since Carney made this decision. We heard from Unifor, the largest private sector union in this country, represents a lot of workers caught up in all this. They're not happy that Carney is taking a step back from the retaliatory tariffs. Do you see an opening there for the NDP? Do you think that there is a potential progressive challenge on the left?
Yeah, possibly, particularly if nothing comes from the climb down. If an agreement is signed quickly and it's somewhat agreeable across the board, there's obviously going to be some people who are unhappy with the ultimate deal when it does come. But if it doesn't work, there's certainly a way to do that. And, you know, for Carney, the entire federal election and the post-election era was all defined on his ability to negotiate. This, you know, master global, banker, knows how these things work. And so far, we haven't come to a conclusion here. So if LeBlanc's trip to Washington this week doesn't, come to some kind of positive outcome in the very near term, then there certainly will be. And you add to that some of the other things, the cuts that Carney's promised in the transfers. You've also got the Air Canada flight attendants strike. The right to strike was taken away. That really didn't have much bearing on the outcome, but certainly I know a lot of people in the trade union movement are going to have long memories when it comes to these kinds of moves.
Vandana, there's a lot of talk about how we didn't really get anything from Trump when we dropped the retaliatory tariffs. But what we haven't really talked about is the possibility of it getting worse if we didn't, right? Because we know from Ambassador Hoekstra that, they weren't happy with these tariffs. There was a lot of talk in D.C. about how only Canada and China had retaliatory tariffs. We were in the bad books, if you will. Is that one defense for Carney here, that if we hadn't moved on this, things actually could have backslided? Forget progress. Things might have actually been worse. We might have lost those exemptions for customs-compliant goods if there wasn't some progress on our front.
Yeah, I mean, to Liz's point, they've been playing hardball. And, I agree that while I think Canadian publics like the idea of elbows up, they like the idea of retaliatory tariffs, if it ultimately doesn't get you a deal, if it doesn't give you the results that you want, then at some point, they won't like it either. So you have a small window. So if taking down the tariffs, if they do get ultimately a deal and you get it in a shorter time frame, I think people can forgive that. I think that will be helpful. If it got worse, then yeah, the blame will be put on, why did you do this? While we don't like any of this, Canadians know that the US is run by a slightly volatile president, but also it's a huge economy. We need to get some sort of deal that works for Canadians, a positive deal that works for us. So, I think people can forgive this. I think while some people will always still feel like, could we have done this if it got worse? That definitely wouldn't have been the sentiment. So I think people are very understanding that if this gets us to a deal, if already we're opening up channels with Dominic LeBlanc meeting with Secretary Lutnick, then I think people can forgive that right now.
Lisa, 15 seconds to you. Quick final word.
Elbows up means that Canada is not going to be a state for the United States. Elbows up means we're not going to go there anymore. Elbows up means that we're not going to choose to buy U.S. products anymore. It had nothing to do with tariffs. Canadians want elbows up, but not necessarily paying more for what they want here in Canada.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much to the Power Panel. Vandana Cutter, Lisa Ray, and Brad Levine. Nice to see you guys. Thank you so much for being on. I'm JP Tasker. Thank you so much for watching Power and Politics. There's more coming up on CBC News Network. Stay right there.